Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another Supercoach Insider podcast. My name is Swiz, here to talk all things round 19 with my team. Before we get into that, though, as always, check us out on all our social media platforms and wherever you get your podcasts, in particular our YouTube, TikTok, and Spotify. And to get in contact with us, best way is via Twitter, Supercoach Insider 100 or Swiz26. Well, it's a Thursday night currently as I'm recording, which means the Matildas and the Ashes is on, but no footy, which is a bit different. So just a standard weekend, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Does make those vice captain options a little bit different this week because we've had the luxury of the Thursday night. Well done to those who had either Tim English or Gawn as their VC. I got a bit stubborn thinking English is probably going about 140 and thought there might be a couple guys, including Dacos and Ryan, go a bit better in the Saturday game. And unfortunately, as much as I thought I had the VC on Dacos and was cheering him all day, at some point when I was working probably at 5 a.m. in the morning on the Saturday morning, I flicked it over to Ryan, which was very unfortunate. And then for whatever reason, thought, let's have a good idea and put the captain on Zach Merritt last week. Instead of probably going the obvious choice of Laird or Dawson or really anybody, and watch my VC 100, watch my captain get 69. And it's funny because just before the Essendon game, I was like, well, maybe I'll put it on Sicily. And luckily didn't go there because that was actually even worse. But I know a few people jumped on that. So while everyone was getting 173 for English, or if you're one of those lucky owners that had gone and got 215 with your vice captain, I'm sitting there I was in a mosh pit checking the scores of the Essendon Geelong game in between bands. And yeah, very disappointing. So if only I was probably taking Chris's vice captains and captains each week, I think I worked out to be about 80th overall. So go to him for vice captains and captains, or do as I say, not as I do. But yeah, for trades, I seem to be over Chris this season, it's just frustrating because we've talked about from round one where Laird over Witts. And then this was just an absolute disaster. Still scored 22.94 and only dropped a little bit back down to 8.39. I think the English decision would have put me about 500th overall. But I was more looking at Dacos anyway. Yeah, so just so annoyed at myself. It's the problem when you get on break in early mornings and start playing with your team and then get home from work and check afterwards and go, I didn't do that. We've all been there. It could have been worse, but it was pretty bad last week. And just, another little mistake. It's just so frustrating. But I'm human. Everyone does it at some point. And, unfortunately, it didn't work out. So into my team this week, as you can see, it's zero trades. So there'll be no more trading. And that was because there was a last-minute trade last week. And when Tom Green news came out that he did his hammy, I brought in Nick Martin. Now, still managed to find the ball 23 times, but the Bombers were so disappointing. I've gone back and watched some of that game, but yikes, the Cats did an absolute number on them. So a little bit disappointed with that. But at the same time, the Martin trade in did open a whole lot of flexibility for my team. And importantly, very important this week because there was news that Butters could be out. And if Butters was allowed out, that flexibility could come in handy. But more importantly, now with the news that Laird is out, I've got the still option to loophole some players around. So, as I said at the moment, we've got the English vice captain, even though Phillips is back. Was debating between him and Bont, but I feel like probably English isn't going as big this week, but he has got a 200 before against the Bombers. So, maybe just jump on now that's a week late and watch him probably do nothing. And the captain's on Dacos. I don't feel like I'm getting tempted by really anyone else this weekend. Taranto was, it's even the annoying thing, Taranto. I still had Taranto last week against West Coast. Like, what was I thinking about? Like, in hindsight, beautiful thing, hindsight. Merritt. I was like thinking, Merritt, 200th game. They've got a big point to prove here, the Bombers, that, they're going to go to Geelong and not get absolutely pushed over. And it just absolutely happened. So anyway, let's move on from that. So, so team. So there's no trades left, but the great thing is I do have 23rd and 24th premiums in there. Well, we can argue Wines at the Mills at the moment as premiums, but there's still, we can, for this argument, we'll call them premiums. And even Marriage popped up with a 67. That was the frustrating thing because I could have just potentially held Green and had Marriage, but the problem was the trades I would have wanted to do, Like it's probably then bringing in Took. I might have able to get. I probably could have got LDU, but then it kind of would have stuffed my loophole options there. Like I do have Butters sitting there in that midfield at the moment. And just that extra flexibility to move around there. So like Green to LDU this week, yeah, that could have been really good. And with having LDU there covering Laird. But I do like the flexibility of moving players around. So it's it balances itself out, I guess. Because if, like last week, and had that sort of forward injury, or if I have a midfield or a defender injury, at the moment Dawson's sitting in my midfield. If Day doesn't score well, which I think he probably does, Dawson can go back for Constable. If Wines doesn't score well, Dawson can stay there. If Wines does score well, I can move Dawson back, put Laird on field. Butters playing in that Saturday night game. I was actually been debating between Butters and Wines who should sit on the bench. What Butters has an injury concern. Wines obviously it's been up and down. So I've sort of moved them back and forward. Nick Martin with the emergency in the forward line. I think he probably rebounds really well this week, but just in case he doesn't, like Roberts is there, but I can flick Roberts around with Butters. Butters goes back into the forward line, and then Wines just comes on, or Will Day then comes into my midfield again. So actually no, because I've already got Dawson there. So actually no, Will Day doesn't have to come. Well, actually either way, it's Dawson or Day. But it just gives lots of options what I want to do with my team. If I really wanted to, I could loophole Marriage if I wanted to, or Chesser. But against like the Blues, I feel like West Coast much better team at home. It's actually probably Chesser scores probably better this week. Marriage scores bad, and Marriage always seems to do half decent at home. That was a real handy inclusion. For those who were sweating on Marriage. I know a few people had 17 last week, and then Marriage came back in for the 18th, and that's what I was staring down to. But as I said, it's just a sort of little flexibility with Martin there, and we'll see how that plays out. Like the Butters Libba decision hasn't worked out so well so far. Like 1 week was good, and then last week naturally killed with Butters only getting an 84 and Libba like the 140. Briggs versus Marshall has been pretty even, so that trade's not killing me at the moment, which is good. Unfortunately, Rhino the 102 and Houston going through the roof puts Chris back ahead of that. I think he's about 50 points ahead with that trade. So it'll be interesting to see how these pan out when I reflect at the end of the season. There's nothing you can do about it. You go through all the footage and the data and their fixtures, but if a player gets on a heater, or there's other players that pull out of other games and things happen there, we can see big scores happen. So that's how I'm sitting, and that's what I've got to run with for the rest of the season, as there is no trades left. It was interesting. I know a couple of people been putting on Twitter, and I should give one of these guys actually their day in the sun here. Where is he? I think it is Supercoach. Oh, Steve Smith, SDS Supercoach. So he's put up a thought here about what about a loan player edition, where, say, for example, Laird's out this week, you can loan him out and get a player, he's saying, of the same value. I kind of threw up maybe 80% if Supercoach platforms would allow that. And he's saying maybe add 4 of them throughout the season where it's a 1 week loan. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts about that, or if you've got any other thoughts. One I've always thought is maybe you can buy trades. So maybe in this situation, I'm out of trades. I could still click and trade Laird, but that might cost me 300,000 of his value. So I could probably maybe trade Laird to George Hewitt, for example, might be the trade this week. And so I lose that cash out of my side, but I end up making a replacement player. So that's always one I thought. And I just think no matter what rule changes you bring in, there's always going to be different strategies, and the best players are always going to rise to the top. I know some people want to bring it back to the old 20 trades. It'd be interesting to hear if you've got any thoughts out there. And just through our connections, we get in touch with some of the Herald Sun boys. We can obviously pass any of the really good ones on, or just even, flood them with all of them and see their thoughts. But so if you've got anything, leave us a comment, leave us a message, or hit us up and say, if there's thoughts that you would like to see done at Supercoach. So it doesn't affect me this week because Tom Green is now out of my side, but it does affect other people. So it's looking like at least 2 more weeks. So if that is you in that situation and you're looking for a trade option, now most people should have some sort of cash in, and it's about $1,000 to get up to LDU. So that is the obvious choice. But you've also got Took and Josh Kelly, who seem to be the other 2 best options there. I think that's pretty simple with that one. Apologies to the person of the advice I gave last week because they were like, who should I trade in on the Saturday for a ruckman? So obviously I'd missed Gawn, and I was like, well, go ahead and get Sean Darcy. He's going to absolutely kill it against no Collingwood ruck. And he absolutely was killing it. Unfortunately, you can't, you do know like some players who have had injury concerns in the past, always high chance to redo it, but yeah, he was absolutely smashing. He was on 89 when he got subbed out, which was early in the third quarter, and was looking like scoring maybe a 150, but unfortunately these things happen. So sorry to Timmy, who was asking for that advice, but at the same time, any player can get injured at any time, and it's just the unfortunate thing with Supercoach. And then I think his other choice he was looking at was Witts, who naturally ended up going to 126. So the points last week didn't cost too much, but it's just the ongoing and then what you have to do this week. So they're talking about it might only be a week or 2, but they haven't, I don't think, Freo have 100% confirmed that. This is where the Darcy Cameron does help, and we did talk about that. Him being back this week, hopefully you can cover him through a loophole situation. And yeah, you definitely, perfect world would be wanting to try to hold onto a player like that. If you can't, well, yeah, Maxi Gawn playing by himself. Looks like Melbourne have committed to having Grundy down in the reserves for another couple of weeks. So it's definitely something to think of, because we'll see what Gawn can do when he is playing by himself in that solo ruck position. In regards to some other probably trade news, and it's not a huge amount as it sort of comes to this time of year. But as I said, probably some of this comes around to you if you've got like your keeper leagues in particular. Your single draft seasons don't matter, but if you're heading into finals or haven't headed into finals yet, there might be certain players that you might be able to pick up from other teams if you can get the right trade, especially depending on where you are on your ladder. And even if you're head-to-head, you can start sort of planning out maybe who your opponents could be in Supercoach finals and be looking at maybe potential pods. A lot of teams are very similar. That's why I've kind of jumped on Nick Martin as well, because very low ownership, and it's just really unfortunate when your pods go really bad. It really does hurt, but at the same time, I'm sort of hoping that him, maybe Wines, these guys can somehow get on a little bit of a run, and that's the difference. And I've talked about this before. I think the year I finished about 250th. I think I was about 50th coming into 4 rounds to go. And instead of I could have held that 50th spot, but you may as well have a crack at the 50K, and you bring in pods and then they don't work out and you drop. But it's like, well, big deal. Like, yeah, we all want to finish inside the top 1,000, but at the end of the day, we all want to be like JP and Emily and winning. And yeah, I'm always going to sort of take some risks and have a crack at that. And that's still how I play. And if I can still at the same time finish inside the top 1,000, if it doesn't work out, well, even better. So from an interesting one, the Bulldogs have been in and out with Bailey Smith. So have a look at his role. He could be gettable from the right draft team if you've got a keeper league. There's a lot of talk about, does he move next season? So if you've got probably someone who might not be up with trade news, which can happen sometimes, somebody like him could be picked off, because if he does go to a team like Geelong, he's going to get a more midfield role. So I'd be trying to move heaven and earth to get him into my draft team. It's a hard thing with a couple of drafts I'm in, everybody knows their footy, but there is one draft in particular that I'm going to try to pick off. George Hewitt, and he could even be on potentially waivers just because of his form. Cripps is out this week. So adding on to the fact that I had no Kennedy, so he's playing midfield against West Coast. I expect him to go huge, and that's another one. If you've got the trade to burn, and that was what I was talking about last week, if Hewitt had dropped enough and Marriage gone up enough, I was going to hold that trade to do that. Unfortunately, I can't. I would have been a little bit short of doing it anyway. It's just unfortunate, but I think he can definitely rebound. Even if it's 90, 100, it's somebody who's going to cost you, 260. it's I think he's an absolute bargain to bring in. So yeah, I'd be definitely considering Hewitt, and even as I said, in a draft, and somebody might still be willing to give him up too. So yeah, definitely consider that. Jimby's out also from West Coast, so if anybody for whatever reason is holding him, but that might be more of a draft situation. Josh Dunkley being back finally, it's really good. But the Lions have omitted Lions. Zach Bailey is out injured, and Dev Robertson. Now he's another one I was talking to with Ben. Might be a little sneaky one if you've got him on a waiver in a draft keeper league. So maybe consider picking him up, because there is some talk that potentially he could be on the outer next year at another club, maybe even like West Coast, where he's originally from. So if he had a better role, he could be a smoky come for next season. Caleb Sarong's back for Freo, so that's good. And Chad Warner for Sydney. So if Callum Mills, in a perfect world, I would like to loophole, but it's probably the sort of game he actually goes quite well. So we'll see how that kind of plays out. So it's been a bit underwhelming this week. The real interesting one there is Luke Jackson playing sole ruck versus Hayden McLean. And just maybe monitor, like, this is a hard where you take risks, come say your keeper leagues, for example, because if Darcy was to leave, Jackson's value goes through the roof next year, and he should still be a forward ruck. But if Darcy was to stay, we know that that's going to massively affect Jackson. So it's there's all risks involved with this. Darcy Cameron being back from Collingwood is very handy. A couple of the Giants players. And again, just have a look at like their followers. So with Green not in and Kelly playing in that wing role, Cornelio and Perryman are going to get a lot of that midfield time. Another one just to have a sneaky look at is Callum Ward this week, because he should play midfield. He's been doing fairly well. I don't think you're going to pick him up on waivers, but there's always a chance if you've got a shallow keeper league, and I've seen this in a few times. A lot of the older guys, like even a couple of weeks ago, like I saw players like Hawkins and Taylor Walker sitting there because everyone's trying to, I'm going to just pick up some of the young kids. So I've got my team set for next season while I can. And some of these older guys are getting dropped. So somebody like Callum Ward could be really handy, especially this week if you have to sort of win one of those games. So yeah, definitely kind of consider that. Matt Crouch is back from the Crows with the news that Laird's out, and he's been named in the guts. So there's a big chance he might be sitting on the waivers for you. And that's a good one for even standard draft leagues. So, and somebody like him, this is where I guess where that proposal of the loan situation would be interesting, because if you were loaning out Laird out of your team for a week to replace him, Matt Crouch for 1 week, that is just a sort of 1 week wonder into your team, comes out, probably scores well, and then back Laird comes in and out he goes. So North Melbourne, unfortunately, George Wardlaw is injured, and that'll be his season done. So if you have him still and you've got trades, you do need to move him on. It's just unfortunate for the young fella, because he has had some ongoing injury concerns, especially with his legs and hammies all through his juniors. That's a definite trade. I think the other one too is Zeeble. So in and out of this side at the moment. He is playing this week. But maybe a bit of a thought about what you are doing with him going forward. Well, it's actually extended squad, but I think if I have a look here, and it's not going to come up into my side. Where are we? Jack Zeeble is actually named on an extended bench again. So it is a bit of a worry if you are an owner of him and you have held for this long. So I think you'd need to start looking at your options there and what you're doing with him. I don't actually know why. I'm trying to find out why he isn't coming up on my side, and I've got it on midfielders, which is naturally means he is not going to show up. So where is Zeebs here? 418 now. It's really hard for those people who have held him this long. I'm hoping that he'd come good. 59 followed by 41. It just has to be moved out of your side. So we'll quickly talk about that one at a 420 price. And at least with Zeeble, you've got the option because it's he is that forward defensive. Now, if you go the optimize, you do have the ability, it will move, but I prefer you try to do it yourself if you've got that sort of trade option, or even trade, or if you've got that loophole player already in your side, because some people have been saying they're having issues with the optimize and it's moving players around and then they can't kind of reverse it. So that's now the hard thing with some of these recommendations is it all depends on sort of what sort of cash you have as well. So Luke McDonald's been probably the big beneficiary recently, and I know a few people have been bagging him about his skills, especially some of the North Melbourne supporters, even though he's the captain. But, the last 3 weeks, an 80, 100 and 96, we've also been waiting for him to have go back into those runs. I really like Bailey Scott. He's been a real left field option. I talked to him about him at the start of the year, more as like a draft smoky, but maybe as somebody who could go potentially for 5 weeks. Might be an interesting sort of look at, because some of these North Melbourne players are getting sort of different roles under Radden. Now, how does that change if Clarko comes back in round 21? It is, but he has seemed to be a bit of a favourite there for them. Bailey's got the 135 last week. The problem is it is a bit up and down. Like, he has thrown up another 130, can throw in the low score as well. Now, and as I said, does that sort of role change with with Clarko going out? So it's probably a big risk there. And it gets hard with some of these North Melbourne players, because what does happen when they go? Himmelberg, we say about each week, and we think he's just going to have the big game at some point. So he does have to be considered, and he's in that price range with Zeeble. The one that we've completely missed out on is Sam Flanders. We were very worried about with Tuke coming back and what would happen. There's a lot of talk about him being, a lot of interest about him, about returning to Victoria. But 100, 119, 96 and 125. So he's gone up 170k in the space of 4 weeks. They've got some good games coming up as well. As much as, it's the Giants, Brisbane, Adelaide, but then they finish for Sydney, Carlton, North. So, it doesn't actually seem to be worrying Flanders too much. So that could be one if you need a forward spot to definitely consider. And as I've already said, you got the likes of George Hewitt. So it will depend on kind of what your situation is, how many trades you have left. There's some people like me with no trades but has cover. There's some people there with still 5 or 6 trades, which is amazing, but they might be trying to find a way to fill up their team. So you've definitely got to consider the situation that you are in. And that's why I always say it's easier when you hit us up and tell us like how many trades you've got left when you're asking for advice, because that can completely change our thoughts of if you've got 1 trade compared to if you've got 4 or 5 trades. I did have a few people ask me about draft stars for this round. So there's just a couple definitely worth looking at. The Carlton West Coast game, that's huge this week. Even Richmond Hawthorn, Richmond do give up points to the in particular midfielders and backmen. And then the flip side, Richmond do have some players that are going to absolutely monster the Hawks. So that's not a bad game, especially if you're looking at the whole round. And that's sort of what I do on the Friday night. I'll put in a whole round game, and then there's the individual matches. And then you've got St Kilda North. So you've kind of best buys. Like, you've got the small forwards at St Kilda. Like Dan Butler's somebody who's like 9,000. He's sort of only been going 50s the last 3 weeks, but can definitely pop up, kick a few goals under the roof at Marvel. And we know King's out, so this is the sort of game where you could get on someone like him at that price, and he's just going to bob up and kick 3 or 4, especially with Higgins, who's been struggling. So, and they're roughly the same price. So that's not a bad one there. You've got the likes of, say, a Jack Martin, who's only had, he scores in Draft Stars, which is more a fantasy-based game, but, he scored a 25 and a 32, but he had that one game where he's got 86. So if you're looking maybe for a cheaper option there at 8,300, could definitely jump on that. Jesse Motlop was the one that had the better game last week, but he only scored 62 in fantasy, so you want somebody who can still find the ball. You've got... actually, I'm not going to recommend him. If you go a little bit higher up in your forward line, and the forwards, I always think this is where you do find more your pods compared to a lot of the midfielders highly owned. Chad Wingard, who seems to be playing for his career, has put up a 78 and 81 recently. So definitely an option there. Like he's at 9-4. And as we go a little bit more expensive, like you got your Lockie Fogarty this week against West Coast. He's been really solid since coming in to the team. And there was one other, well, actually, Hayden McLean absolutely got smoked last week, and he's a forward ruck, so he could be a consideration for your ruck 10,000, but he is up against Jackson, and then Jackson's the other option, so you could potentially play both of them as your forward or even put both in as your ruck this week, playing each other. We saw what they both, like McLean did against English. Like English went huge, but McLean still scored pretty well as well. So yeah, some rucks like that can be handy because they're not going to cost you, be priced out. Especially when you're looking at the main rucks, like you got Timmy English here at 17,000 and Marshall at 16,000, Gorn at 15,000, and before that, Gorn was only sort of going 80s. You got the big 162 in fantasy the week before. Marshall's had his up and down games, even Tim English. So if you're gonna, you don't want to kind of spend your entire bankroll if you can avoid it. So yeah, there's definitely some good options with that little group. Defenders always seem to be a good place for your scorers, and you want more your proven guys, but players who are going to absolutely rack up the ball. Being against Sydney and back home, Luke Ryan is a better player in losses, but definitely a better player when he's at home. So somebody to like there. The Jordan Clark has been in some good form. We've talked about Flanders as well. Ed Richards been back for the Dogs. Got the 108 last week. Definitely couldn't get some ball playing under the roof against the Bombers. So he's still at a reasonable price in defence compared to a couple of his where he probably was earlier in the year. So consider him, especially in maybe even the Bulldogs Essendon game. Like it's 11,000, and when we're talking about the best defenders like Doherty 16,000, Richards can definitely match that on the points. The Collingwood boys both Dacos has been absolutely killing it. They're becoming a situation where they're nearly getting priced out, or you're kind of paying what you get for. I don't mind actually that Giants Suns game, especially. Definitely a week to consider Cornelio, Perryman, as I said before. And the big one then for Carlton is you've got to consider Akers this week at 13,800. And I'm just trying to find George Hewitt. Well, Matt Crouch is an absolute lock if you play the entire week. He's got one score of 40 this year. He's 12,600. So I'd be definitely getting him in. And George Hewitt's 11,880 in Draft Stars. So scored a 74 last week. It's an absolute bargain. So if you're playing the Carlton West Coast game, his ownership's going to be through the roof. But for an overall round, not as many people are going to be thinking necessarily about him. So his percentage should come down, and so it's somebody to consider for that. So hopefully those ones sort of give you a good, starting point and something to think about, because if you go in and just try to pick the big high price guys and then just try to pick rookies 6,000, the rookies can have really bad games or get subbed out. So you want to kind of get those guys around, average is usually around that 11,000 mark. So if you can get a couple of those forwards at sort of 9,000, bump the rest of your team up to sort of 12, 13,000. Usually it's a good way to build your team there. So hopefully those people who have been questioning and asking about some Draft Stars advice, that's will at least give you a little bit of knowledge, and we can try to build on that as we go on. Because I'm not going to have a huge amount to talk about with my teams, I'm really happy to answer anything else you want to talk about. As we said, we've covered Draft Stars and Draft this week, but there's other things, and as I said, put in questions if you want, and not even just about this. And I did fail to mention this at the start of the pod, but we've got the Fancast AFL podcast going. So if you've got any even general footy questions, feel free to throw them my way, and I can add them to our run sheet for that podcast, which we record on a Friday night. It's usually out on a Monday now. So that's what we're looking at, and I really do appreciate everyone tuning in as always, as my the old hay fever's catching up on me. But hopefully all your teams are settled. Feel free, send us a message, tell us how you're going, and we will be back hopefully with a good score and good ranking improvement next week. Enjoy, guys. Bye.